All right, good morning, everyone. All right, we're gonna keep this uncomfortable thing going, because again, it's where in that those moments of tension is where the sparks for change come, and change can only come when somebody wants to move. Nothing stagnant changes. It's stagnant. That's why we call it that. So a couple of weeks ago, I was actually on a panel, and we were talking about boys and men of color and black men and boys. And one of our colleagues in this work, Leon Andrews, quoted a statistic. He said that every 24 hours, we lose 14 young black men and boys, young black people, to either homicide or suicide. Every 24 hours, we lose 14 of our young people to homicide or suicide. So now that's 14 souls gone. The other part that we know, which is damaging, shocking, and hopefully makes everybody uncomfortable, that a large number of those 14 that are lost to homicide are taken, their lives are taken by other black men, young black boys, a lot of them. So if you think about that, you think about that number, you think about the lives lost, you think about the potential that's lost, the things that need to move forward in our community that maybe won't move forward because these souls are gone, then that's the kind of energy, then that's the kind of thing that it takes. If that's what it takes to spark you to move forward, then maybe that's what it takes. But again, we want to keep this uncomfortable thing going forward. Maybe I'll ease it a little bit, just a little. So one of the things that's great about being in Washington, D.C. is that we're actually in Washington, D.C. And there's a mix of all types of things that happen here. So we're going to have a little bit of audience participation right now. If you are work for or consider yourself the representative of the federal government of the United States, please raise your hand. Look around. If you work for or consider yourself a representative of a nonprofit that has that's a national nonprofit that's based in D.C. that may do some work here but does a lot of work in other parts of the country, please raise your hand. Great. If you are a representative of a nonprofit that's not only based here but a local nonprofit that does a lot of work here, raise your hand. Woohoo! Yeah, these are the ones. I'm going after all of y'all after this. If you are a funder that's either a national funder or works for a foundation that may or may not be based locally but does some work locally but a lot of work in other parts of the country or the world, please raise your hand. And if you are from a local philanthropic entity that does a lot of work here, raise your hand. If you are a resident of the District of Columbia, raise your hand. If you reside in the region, the DMV, raise your hand. If you are here from another part of the country and you came just because Bomani said, come on. Okay, if you're here from another part of the country, please raise your hand. Thank you. So I want to go back to what Sean said about what it means to go fast and what it means to go far. If you look to your left and your right, if you look in front of you and behind you, we got people here from all over the country that do work in all types of organizations that all have an interest in this thing we call black male achievement for some reason, right? Part of what our work is today is to begin to figure out how do we really work well together? How do we move these things forward? We got people here from education institutions, folks who do justice work, people in the health field, people who are doing things around economic mobility and economic development. We got it all in this room and all in this area. And what we need to do is to figure out how we're going to move forward together. My theory is that if we come up with common definition of what black male achievement is and what success is for black men and black women, we should be able to do that work. Because it'll be big and broad enough for us to all agree to, and then everybody can carry out those things that they can specialize in and move these things forward. So I'm going to shut up because I think we're running a little bit behind Ed and Sean. But I would like to ask our first panel to come forward. If you could please help me welcome Dr. Gail Christopher from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. George Garrow from Concerned Black Men, Inc. Seema Shah from the Foundation Center. and Jim Shelton from the U.S. Department of Education and the My Brother's Keeper Task Force. Thank you. And I mean, these people are well known, right? Anybody here unfamiliar with anybody? Too bad, because now you got to listen to what they say. Because we're going to have, I got a couple questions that I'm going to ask them, and then the way that I'd like this to go is we'll talk kind of with the moderated questions for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we want to turn it over to you all for questions and dialogue. Now, this is the warm-up, right? This panel is the warm-up, because the real deal is coming after this. We got a panel of five powerful young brothers who are giving us our marching orders, right? We're here, like I said, we need to figure out how we work together and move forward, but unless we listen to them and do what they tell us to do, not interpret it and make it fit what we already doing and try to make it go forward, but as long as we listen and do what they tell us to do, then we should be able to move forward. So we're going to start with the warm-up right now. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So everybody knows there's microphones on there's microphones on the two tables there. So just grab the microphone and answer. So for each of the panelists, I'd love for you guys to briefly state a little bit about your background, and then talk about what your organizations are doing in this area, in this field of either black male achievement or boys and men of color achievement. So just go down the road.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Gail Christopher, Vice President for Program at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and as you've already heard, we've been in the business of improving or supporting efforts to improve the opportunities for men and boys of color for over 20 years. We have a major initiative that our foundation stepped up, our board of directors. We call it America Healing, and it's all about moving beyond denial about racism. Both at all levels, particularly the structural levels. And we continue to partner. We're proud to be part of the Alliance for Men and Boys of Color and My Brother's Keeper. And so that's who we are, that's what we do, and I'll say much more later.
Thank you. My name is George Garrow. I'm Executive Director of Concerned Black Men National. We're a national organization based here in Washington, D.C. We do our best to ensure that every child has a responsible and caring adult in his or her life. And we have a specific focus on black boys. We have chapters around the country. We do our best practice work here, and we are very much interested in replicating and scaling our work nationally. What we are attempting to do with respect to the field of black male achievement is attempting to take a leadership role over the past many years, really, but with a focus over the past 10 years. We've attempted to, we like to hope that we help to make these types of things possible. And most importantly, we want to help to lead the field. If we're going to ensure, and I heard Sean talk about, we all know, those of us who are old enough to know that we were at this point about 20, 25 years ago. And unfortunately, it fizzled. And we have to ensure that that doesn't happen again. So one of the things that Concerned Black Men wants to do is to take a leadership role in helping to build a field, building that infrastructure that is necessary to continue the work well beyond today. And so what we're really talking about, and I hope that we can have some discussion about this at some point, is building that field of organizations that do policy and advocacy, that three-legged stool of policy and advocacy, research and practice, and helping to build organizations and build the capacity of organizations that do that type of work to ensure that we sustain this effort over time. If we're going to be really successful, we have to get past this point and ensure that this work is sustained over time. So we're hoping that Concerned Black Men is working very hard to play a thought leadership role to make that happen with organizations. And DC plays a very important part of ensuring that that occurs. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jim Shelton. I'm currently the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Education. That means I run it day to day. and I'm the executive director of the My Brother's Keeper program, which means I run it day to day along with the leadership of Broderick Johnson at the White House. The most important thing about me is I'm born and raised here in Southeast DC. And then it starts already. That is one of the reasons I don't speak a lot in DC, because it is very hard for me to talk about this without becoming enraged. So my job is three parts. The first is to do what the president asked, which is to create a national context in which people like you who are doing the work on the ground can actually have the air cover to transform young people's lives, specifically our boys and men of color. The second is to use the resources of the federal government to create an infrastructure that means that work is both well supported and sustained over time. Now, a lot of that you won't hear called My Brother's Keeper. Be clear, you will not hear it called My Brother's Keeper. But be clear, when we talk about building cradle to college and career pipelines and pathways for our young people, when we talk about high quality early learning, when we talk about turning around dropout factory high schools, when we talk about access to health care, when we talk about trauma-informed care in our schools and in our juvenile facilities, we are talking about vulnerable populations, and we're talking about our boys and men of color. The third thing that I'm supposed to do is to make sure that this work focuses on solutions, not naming the problem. I know that's the work you all are here in the room for, but there's a lot of people who would be very happy to just keep talking about it. Not this time. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see such an incredible turnout here in DC. So again, my name is Seema Shah. I'm Director of Research for Special Projects at the Foundation Center. And you've heard already a lot this morning about the work that we've done in partnership with Open Society Foundation's Campaign for Black Male Achievement, but I'll just very quickly highlight a little bit of the work that we've been doing around Black male achievement. So a lot of you may know about the Foundation Center. If you're a grant seeker, if you work for a nonprofit, you've probably accessed some of our resources. But we also do a lot of work with grant makers as well to illuminate giving trends in the field on a range of important issues. So we've had the privilege of working with Open Society's Campaign for Black Male Achievement for the past 2.5 years. And in October 2012, we came out with the report, Where Do We Go From Here?, which all of you have, which shares baseline giving trends related to Black men and boys. And then in March 2013, we built on that work and we released a website. We launched a website called bmafunders.org, which brings some of the data from the report to life. It allows you to interact and engage with the data. There's a funding map on the site where you can see exactly which organizations are getting grants for what purpose, for how much. And so it's a great way to track the money, but it's also a great way to identify potential partners and collaborators in the field. So I encourage you to check that out. We also have a whole bunch of other resources on the site, including news and information about what's going on in the field. We have a repository of research reports, so instead of having to go to a bunch of different websites to get the research you want, we pulled it together in one place so that folks have easy access to all of that knowledge and information. So that's bmafunders.org. We launched it March 2013. And then, as you've been hearing about this morning, earlier this year, in May, we launched a report, Building a Beloved Community, which came out of conversations that we had with Sean and Rashid at Open Society around the recognition that we're really at sort of an interesting moment in time with the field, and that it was important to take stock of the work that was happening and to reflect on what we needed to do to move forward in a thoughtful and a strategic way. So what we did is we interviewed 50 leaders in the field, everybody from foundation presidents like Darren Walker and Bob Ross to nonprofit leaders like Jeff Canada. So what you see in the report is really their thinking in terms of what comes next.
Thank you. Now, I had a number of questions to ask the panel, and I think all of them. See, there's a danger in giving your panelists the questions beforehand. Sometimes they answer them before you ask them. So some of these have been answered already, but I'm gonna take a little liberties with our questions. One of the things I think that's really important about this work is to frame it, that we're not just talking about programs or policy or what philanthropy can do. We're talking about something that's very, very personal. It's something that each of us have to think about and look at when we hear names or when we see images of black men and black boys. There's a lot of things that's there. There's a certain narrative that kind of has been prevalent in our society for a long time. And we have folks who are here in the room along with Dr. Christopher and a few others who are working really hard to change that. So I just want to make sure I recognize our brother here, Travian Shorters, from the BME community, who came all the way here from Miami to be with us today. And has done some outstanding work in doing that. But I also want to ask this question to Dr. Christopher. When we talk about this work of in black male achievement, right? We talk about things that are both systemic and personal, and you've been extremely eloquent at saying how it has to be both. I'm just going to ask if you could expound on what it means to do this work, both from a systemic kind of frame and then also from a personal frame.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really, really, really honored to have been invited to be part of this conversation. As the child of an African-American man who died prematurely, as the sister of an African-American man who had his bouts with the criminal justice system, as the mother of an African-American son who I pray every day doesn't have his interaction with the criminal justice system, but who came close because he was stopped on the street, because he fit the description of someone who had broken into a store. I take these issues deeply, deeply personally and have for all of my life. The fact that we are here, that people of color are here in America today, the fact that there is an America today is a testament to black male achievement. When you really contextualize the dominant paradigm of a false belief in racial hierarchy, that some people have more value than others, the fact that we survived centuries of the institutionalization of that belief, and we survived and succeeded and thrived in spite of the odds, is a testament to the inner power and the resources that we have and that we must continue to leverage. It is so important not to only focus on the negative situations that we face today, but to remind ourselves of who we are and how powerful and how capable we are. So that's one side of it. The other important thing, though, is to realize that the solutions that are necessary are systemic solutions. Police have to change their behaviors. They have to change their behaviors, but they won't do that until they've changed their minds. And they've stopped imagining that it's okay to devalue our sons and our brothers and our fathers. And so that hard work of changing their minds, that has to happen through concentrated, facilitated training and development. The same is true with educators. The same is true with doctors who will make a call not to treat. And they don't even realize that they're making that call not to treat based on an unconscious bias. And so our work is holistic in nature. It's action, but it's also transformational. And we have to do both. I say that because ultimately in a democracy, it's the people that make the decisions and have the power. And so affecting how people think and how people behave is part of the work. It's not all of the work. You have to put systems in place that will control how they behave. There shouldn't be assault weapons in Ferguson, I don't think, readily available to intimidate a community in mourning and that stood up over a tragedy. So we have to make systemic changes, but at the same time, we have to continue to recognize that context, the culture, the belief in this country has been, since its inception, that some people had more value than others. The 21st century can no longer tolerate that false belief, and we have to stand it on its head and assert our value equally as human beings, female, male, all of us together, and marshal the power that will come from that collective exhale, that we will no longer allow this false ideology to even be the underpinning of who we are as a democracy.
Thank you. We were at a meeting a few weeks. Yeah, please. We were at a meeting a few weeks ago. The Association of Black Foundation Executives has a learning and action network around black male funders. And Dr. Christopher's name came up, and Trabian and somebody else said, you know, yeah, well, we need Gail to say it, because only Gail can say it like Gail can say it. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Christopher. Jim, kind of going on this systemic or riding this wave that we have right now with the administration out as far as we can. Can you talk to us about, and we really appreciate the opportunity previously, to have contributed to the report from the task force that went to the president after 60 days of the My Brother's Keeper initiative. Can you talk a little bit about how local areas can continue to have that kind of dialogue or entree and input into the planning and into the work that's happening both during the administration and after? Because we got a bunch of folks here who are workers and want to do some work, so we want to make sure that we're staying connected as much as possible.
So I think there's actually a couple of things to focus on. Sean talked about it in the very beginning, which is that the My Brother's Keeper initiative provides a certain, what I'll call it an umbrella. And it creates an umbrella with systems built into it for us to be able to launch through our policies and programs and the light that we can bring to work that's happening around the country, a national agenda. But the reality is that all of the work happens at the local level. At the local level. And so the key is to find the places between the intersection of the recommendations that we made and the programs that we support and the resources, frankly, that are already there in many cases, and the work that you want to do in local community. Now, I will say that 90% of the energy should be spent connecting with other people in your community about how you're going to move forward the agenda in your community. 10% should be paid attention to what are we doing at the national level and how do you actually access that to help with your momentum. There are two parts to that process. One is what is the federal government doing? But again, there are limitations about once the president made the specific decision that he wanted to declare a focus on a specific gender and a specific race, he also made a decision about limitations on the federal government's ability to lean in hard on that. I don't know if everybody understands that, but if you don't, you need to ask somebody. There are a few things that I was like, what are you going to miss most? What do you miss most being in your role? My First Amendment rights. All right, so the most important thing, though, is then at on the outside, foundations like Kellogg and the Open Society Foundation and several others, along with the Executive Alliance, have been standing up an infrastructure on the outside so that that kind of national infrastructure and support can be provided very directly to communities that are taking on this work, leaning hard not only into the recommendations that we put forward in the beginning, but how it transitions from here on out. There's an organization called the National Convening Council that has been stood up as well to be able to land in certain communities and help lift up that work. That will continue, and my expectation is it will evolve into something with more infrastructure over time, as you should expect to hear something about that in relatively short order.
Thank you. And then before we launch into questions that folks have from the audience, please use the 2 microphones in the outside aisles. And if you do have questions, you can actually begin to line up now. I'd love for each of the panelists here to talk about, like I said, I think one of the things that we need to build up, I think there's an underlying kind of understanding of what success is in this place, in this space, but we haven't articulated it very well. Can each of you say just what is your idea, what's your definition, what's your vision of what success is in this space? If we talk about black male achievement and success, when will we get there? What will the world look like when we get there?
Well, I'll talk about it from the perspective of the Foundation Center. I think a lot of people may wonder, why the Foundation Center is involved in this work. And it's not just about a grant, it's because we have an opportunity as a mainstream institution in the philanthropic world to lift this conversation up beyond the usual suspects. So Kellogg has been involved for a long time. Open Society Foundations has shown a lot of leadership, but there's 75,000 foundations out there, and there's a huge opportunity for those foundations to figure out, how this issue affects all of us and how all of us can be engaged. So I think, for me, when I think about the Foundation Center and what success looks like for us, it's about helping to move this conversation beyond those usual suspects.
So for me, success has, again, 3 parts to it. The first is what you heard from Dr. Christopher, Gail, and is that there is a much broader conversation, cultural change that has to happen in the country. They say the arc of justice bends slowly. My expectation is that it's going to bend slowly, but it's critical to keep the tension on that conversation. But the second very specific thing is that there are things we can do today. Like when I look out here, I'm looking at Cedric, and I think about the conversation we had at the thing focused on data that we did here. And I realized he grew up not very far from me, and the problems he's facing are the same exact problems I faced when I was his age. There is no reason for us not to do every practical thing we can do today to move the needle for the boys who are on the ground today and not wait for people to change their minds. I'm not prepared to tell Cedric, and I'm not prepared to tell my sons to wait for a change in other people's minds. So what that means very specifically is we need to both do the easy things and the hard things that we can get done. When we talk about the dropout factory high schools in this country, we can name them, and we know that they account for 50% of overall dropouts, but 75% of the black and brown dropouts. And anybody who has been to a graduation in one of these communities knows that we're looking at a 10 to 20% gap between the males and the females in those schools in almost every one of them. So we fix those, we move the needle like we have. And so we've seen the dropout rates change dramatically over the last 5 years, and we've seen the graduation rates hit all-time highs. That is specifically because we did the things, difficult things we knew we needed to do. And the third and last piece of it is infrastructure. It's not sexy, nobody wants to talk about it, but the reality is we need an infrastructure both in our nonprofit organizations and in our governments, whether it's integrated data like they're trying to do here so you can actually see what's going on across systems, or collaboratives and real coherence for collective impact work. That infrastructure needs to exist so we can sustain it.
On a very fundamental level, we want high-achieving young men who take their rightful place in society as leaders of their families, communities. We want to have young black men grow up to be business leaders. We want Wall Street to look different. We want K Street to look different. We want city government, state government, federal government to look different. These are, to me, that's pretty basic. That's what I think about every day. I want to be able to see young people, young men grow up to be old men who are successful, who are not doing the things that we had to do just to, most of us had to do just to make a living or to get up and face the day. I mean, I want a different world for them. And it should be personal because this is our legacy. I mean, it's particularly legacy for other black men. You know, I talk to my friends. I'm not a member of a fraternity, but I talk to my friends in fraternities, and I say, on a basic level, you want men to replace you in the organization, and you don't have that now. That is diminishing. If you go to any college campus, any HBCU, you see that happening. So on the fundamental level, we want that world should be different, so that when we look at these so-called pillars of society, we see black men, young black men who are middle-aged black men and older black men who are accepting and taking their rightful place in leadership in this society. I mean, that's pretty basic to me.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that's been said, particularly the emphasis on not waiting. I think Dr. King's book, Why We Can't Wait, we have never been able to wait. And by and large, we haven't waited. We have the responsibility to do it all and to do it all well. But in addition to everything that's said, I would say that so much of what creates our image of ourselves and our expectations of others are the images that we see and the stories that we hear. And so part of the success of this work, a piece of it, is to have different images and different stories become the dominant ethos, if you will, of who we are. I want young men, all of you in this room, to realize that you are leaders, the descendants of kings, people who have overcome and will continue to overcome tremendous obstacles. I want you to know that you get to define who you are and how you look and how people respect you, that you don't leave that to others. So this transformation in, I don't ever want to turn on a television again and see that there's a black person in it and I know that person's going to die in that episode because that's what we do, right? Because we're expendable, okay? So there is, in addition to all, and this is, trust me, this is an unprecedented moment in our history in this work. Never has it happened before. So we have to seize it. But a part of it is a concerted effort to improve, not just change, but to improve the national story and narrative so that you look in the mirror and you always love what you see. And you look at your brothers and your sisters and you love them because you have a tremendous sense of value for who you are. So that is part of the success as well.
Thank you. Can we give it up for our panel, please? And again, are there, as I see some folks are lined up at the microphone for questions? They're fighting about it over there. Please, over here to, okay, somebody start. Go.
Good morning, and thank you. My name is Nicholas Gordine. I'm with Concerned Black Men National. And Dr. Christopher, you mentioned about the two-pronged approach to change being work and then also changing ideologies. I want to know, I guess, from the panel, what is your perspective or best practice on changing ideologies, especially when it comes to systems, maybe on a mass level, or individuals, both on a mass level? So,
well, we have funded over 500 or more organizations around the country that are working on this at multiple levels, and so I never thought I'd do this, but I'm going to actually refer you to a website. People who know me are laughing, but racialequityresourceguide.org, WKKF racialequityresourceguide.org. It's within institutions that these things have to change, and that's hard work. Whether it's the foundations that have to change their boards, to the school boards, the police departments, the prison system, Congress, you know, we have to make sure that changes are occurring within institutions so that there is a genuine commitment to do the right work. There's an accountability moment you have to get to, which the Kellogg Foundation finally reached, which said, you know what? our country won't succeed unless we make sure that our children that are being born today, most of whom are children of color, that they have every opportunity to succeed. And that was at the level of the board. And so the leadership of organizations all over this country have to be helped to come to that understanding. And then they're willing to do the work. So that's a piece of it, and there are many groups that are out there working on it. One of the big ahas is the power of unconscious bias, and the Kirwan Institute in Ohio is really helping to lead the charge, and Phil Goff's work with police departments all over this country in partnership with the federal government in some places. They're working with diverse police departments to get them to understand some of their automatic responses that are discriminatory. So there is a lot of work within this space, and a lot of people are doing it.
I just want to say, I think, again, that is critically important and builds the long arc to where we want to go. There also is, how do you help people understand their current incentives very differently? And so let me give two examples. One, I don't care why certain people want to reduce the number of people in prison right now. The fact is, all of a sudden, there's a new set of people from the conservative side who are very interested in reducing the number of people in prison. We can capitalize on the fact that they now can see that it is in their interest to reduce the number of people in prison. We can get, as we have right now, joint legislation moving because of that. So while we are convincing them to change their belief systems, we can convince them that it is in their interest to do the things we need them to do. Both of these strategies are important. And the second thing is, this is where the federal government comes in. So there's a few things we can do in particular. For example, easiest thing is transparency. Make it clear where the inequities exist, and then usually there's a way to go for accountability around that. Some contexts easier than others, and in particular where it's very clear that there is discrimination going on, we actually have an enforcement authority. That's our job. And once it's clear, once you make plain that disparity, it doesn't matter who's in office. They have a responsibility to follow through on that enforcement. So building the infrastructure for that kind of transparency to be able to make those cases clear, and then to change incentives either by carrot or by stick, that's in our hands, which means it's in your hands. Because who makes those decisions?
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Furkan Khaldoon, representing Mentors, Inc. My question is, I want to thank you all for presenting this morning. And it's kind of follow-up to the last question. One of the major institutions that captures our young black males is the educational system, the public education system. And this system is the major thing that can shape the thinking of our young black males and the rest of society. How can what solutions are in place to ensure that the thinking of the teachers and the whole infrastructure of the schools is not out to get young black males? There was a study that just came out about the kind of the hyper-discipline results, hyper-discipline against black males in the school system and the teachers' perceptions of the young black males. So it's something that's really kind of being taught maybe at the college level to the teachers, and it's institutionalized in this system. And this is the system that captures our black males from K through 12. And it influences their thinking about themselves and their people around them, how they view themselves. And then the policemen that shoot our young black males, it influences them, it influences those doctors, it influences everybody in society on how they view us. And this institution is one that can be reformative and really change this, but it seems like this is the system that is ingraining it and entrenching it.
So I'll just start off because I think this is a perfect example of what we just talked about. All right, so we'll use the suspension and expulsion work, which was a great partnership between government and the philanthropic sector and some systems that stepped up. In California, I'll use that example. The data from the federal government study basically showed the disparity in suspensions and expulsions in throughout the state, but in particular in 2 districts, Los Angeles and Oakland. Those districts, instead of running from the data, embraced it and said, yep, we want to do something about it. We leaned in to be helpful, but so did some foundations. The foundations helped on 2 fronts. One, what kinds of solutions are there that actually work in helping to balance out the culture of the school overall that lets you get a better shot at actually reducing the number of suspensions and expulsions, and obviously targeting the ones directed towards boys and men of color. They also, though, leaned into the advocacy work on the outside because there are policies that actually exacerbate this work. This is all before you get to what people's underlying beliefs are, right? But then the follow-through is, and so in the context of the training about how you change the overall school environment through positive behavioral interventions and supports, there's also a set of training that's going on about implicit bias and a set of what they call crucial or courageous conversations to engage people in that work of figuring out how we start to confront the things that we believe that we don't like to admit that we believe. And let's be clear, this is not about just white people embracing their beliefs about people of color, but about people of color embracing their beliefs about other people of color. So that is how we get started. Again, though, remember all the pieces that were in there and the way they build on each other to actually change the outcome. By the way, over 50% reductions in both of those districts in suspensions and expulsions in under 3 years. It doesn't have to wait.
The education system is critical, and I think as we do this work, we have to figure out where do we intervene for the most immediate, measurable change. Education is one, the justice system is another at all levels. In addition to preventing the expulsions, which certainly was a part of, it allowed us to see it. It was like the symptom, right, of a system terribly wrong. We have to make sure that every teacher in every classroom is accountable for a certain level of interaction and quality engagement of the students, right? That they know how to teach children how to work with our children in ways that make them succeed. That every principal is accountable to make sure that every teacher does that. But let us not forget, every parent, every single parent is still accountable to make sure that they are holding those schools accountable and those teachers accountable for the outcomes for the children. And so it is a both and, it is a all engaged. There are curriculum changes underway that bring people of color into history, that have been omitted from history, that help to keep young people engaged in the classroom. There are also changes occurring at the pre-education level so that teachers are better equipped. The adversity in low-income communities, the trauma that kids are exposed to has a definite effect on how best to optimize their learning. And so we now understand that, and we're equipping teachers with the tools to work and to do that better. But it is a long journey, but I really want to make sure my parents stood up for me, I stood up for my kids, and every parent has to, or every neighbor, somebody has to be willing. It's in the community. We have to be willing to stand up for our children at every level.
We got time for maybe one more question. I'm going to ask something that I probably wouldn't do. I really appreciate the interest and enthusiasm from the folks in the audience. But there's a young brother standing over here on this side, and since we only have time for one more question with this panel, I would graciously ask that you allow the young man to ask his question, just so, and then this won't be the only time that we can grab these folks. Maybe all together, yeah, but they're local. Everybody's local, so we can all grab them. But so please. The next panel. Yeah, thank you.
How y'all doing? So like Mr. Shelton stated earlier, I grew up over in Southeast. So I know like the pain of police brutality, not knowing how to unlock your potential, non-success, etc. So basically, like, my question is, it's like certain kids over there like who don't believe they can do anything, who don't know their talents, how to expose themselves. And I believe with change comes exposure. So to those kids who don't have the luxury of going to school or basically meeting y'all programs and organizations, how do you expose your programs to them so they can know how to become the change and be the change?
That's a great question. But what has to happen is me and you have to do that. In other words, our organization is on the ground working with young people in Washington, D.C. and across the country. That's what we do, but we really need you. I mean, you, whether you know it or not, you're a leader in that community. By virtue of, I can tell by the question you just asked and the concern that you just expressed. So what really has to happen is, and I firmly believe this, that young people have to see others engaged in doing the right thing so they can model. I always joke, with my staff that, when we have these panel discussions, we often talk about the problem and don't talk about the solution. And we all know that the things that we've learned in life, we learned from watching people who were successful at doing those things. When you learned how to ride a bicycle, you saw somebody helped you, and they told you the types of things to do, to pedal hard, to keep the handlebars straight. They didn't tell you, okay, you're going to fall down, then you're going to scrape your knee, then you're going to get upset and not want to do this anymore. That's not how you learn how to ride a bicycle. So what I'm saying is that the positive work that you're doing and the work we're trying to do together, we've got to work together to change that image so that those young people can see something different. And then we have to seize upon the opportunity to pull them in. And you're crucial in that part. You play a crucial part in that process.
Great.
But we can talk about that. We can talk afterwards.
As we make the transition, I'm sorry if I'm cutting folks off, but I do want to acknowledge, and in response to the young brother's question, that we also, as the trust, we have young people who are out who are trying to make sure that that people in the community understand and know what resources are there. So I'm gonna call y'all out. I'm gonna ask y'all to stand. Don't look at me like that. Y'all thought y'all was just gonna sit up here and eat for free? I mean, okay, you are. I just want you to stand up. So if we can have our youth outreach coordinators, please stand. Yeah, you too. So one of the things that we did not talk about in great detail is through the trust we run an initiative called Communities on the Rise, and what part of what Communities on the Rise is set up to do is to help communities, individual neighborhoods throughout DC, get a better grasp on and work together on defining what issues that they have in their community, creating solutions to those issues and action plans, and then putting those action plans into motion. And what critical aspect of those of Communities on the Rise is our youth outreach coordinators who are there, who've been trained in those communities. They know the resources that are there, and they are out to talk to not just young people, but folks in the community to tell them about those resources and bring them in. I just want to thank Jim as he's walking out. I told him he could only leave if he got a call from the president, so I think that's what happened. But our yaks are out there. So now it's only 12 of them, and I'm not saying that we're the only ones who are doing that. I know that there are other young people who are out, who are beating the streets, so to speak, to make sure that folks understand what's out there in terms of resources to help move forward. But that's, I think, where all of us come in a little bit more. I want to thank our panel, too. So thank you very much, Dr. Christopher. Thank you very much, George. Thank you very much, Seema. As we transition to our next panel, I think one of the things that you've heard mentioned a number of times this morning is that this is an historic moment. This is the first time that you've heard a sitting president mention boys and men of color in this light and saying that we have to do more to support them. In fact, the last time you heard a sitting president that I can remember, the last time you heard a sitting president mention black boys in particular, it was President William Jefferson Clinton saying that Chicago street gangs were public enemy number one. And I'm like, really? You chasing Osama bin Laden and public enemy number one are Chicago street gangs? We got young brothers who are trying to feed their families, and those are public enemy number one. So I want y'all everybody to take this in, and I'm gonna ask the next panel to come forward, and I'm gonna give a brief introduction to Dr. Robert Simmons, There he is. I was like, man, did he slip out? Dr. Robert Simmons is here from our local, from the DC Public Schools. He's the Chief of Innovation and Research. He has a very long and lettered history that includes, he's authored more than 150 articles. He's been a grant maker that's passed out more than $1 million in this community. And he's here. Dr. Simmons came here at the request, strong request of our Chancellor, Dr. Kaya Henderson, because what we're looking to do is do something different. So you hear his title is Chief of Innovation and Research. Now you think innovation is all things new and blah, 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 and research might be stuff that's already existing. So he's figuring out what that means. So I want to ask Dr. Simmons to come forth and ask our next panel to come forth.